And I've titled this lesson, When the Tempest Rages. If you will, turn over to Mark chapter 4. In Mark chapter 4, we're going to finally finish up chapter 4 in Mark. Lord willing, we will move on and maybe not be so intricate, you might say, in going verse by verse, but a little bit more thought by thought and get through Mark in a timely fashion. That's difficult for me because there's a lot of things that pop out and I want to share, and you just can't, do it all. But in Mark chapter 4, beginning in verse 35, on the same day when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side." Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, "Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?" And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, "Who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey him?" This account is found in Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 through 27, and also in Luke chapter 8, verses 22 through 25. The highlights of the story are as given: the trouble, obviously, a great storm, a tempest arose. Secondly, Jesus is asleep without any concern in the stern of the ship on a pillow, no less. So this isn't some little boat. It's not a rowboat. Third, the apostles question if God even cares. Do you not care that we are perishing? Fourth, Jesus stills the wind, which calms the sea. And fifth, why are the apostles fearful of what just happened and have no faith? And number 6, the apostles feared Jesus and His power greatly. We won't emphasize all of these points. We're just going to hit on 3 primary points this morning. But first of all, I want to give you a little insight in regard to the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee and the surrounding mountain range can make for some very interesting weather. There is a great contrast between the Sea of Galilee, which is 680 feet below sea level, with the climate of a tropical or a semi-tropical warm, moist air, and the mountains that reach to the average height of about 2,000 feet above sea level. And so, being a source of cool, dry air, the results is that a large temperature and pressure change happens down at the Sea of Galilee. The contrast of the cool air masses dropping rapidly through the hills and the warm air of the sea below produces strong winds and violent storms that can just pop up out of nowhere and without any warning. So even large boats caught out on the sea are in immediate danger. The Sea of Galilee is relatively shallow. It's only about 200 feet deep. And so because of the shallowness of the sea, it's easy to whip up, if you will, the waters by the winds. And it happens a lot more rapidly simply because of the shallow water. When you have deeper water, that energy is displaced a whole lot easier. It's absorbed by the depth of the sea, but only being 200 feet deep, it just doesn't take much to shake. You think about a big tub and how much it would take to rock a tub of water and get that water moving in comparison to a bowl. Now these are fishermen. These are men who spend their lifetime on the sea. They're not at all immune to this type of turbulence. Or are they? What about when your world is shaken? What about when your world is rocked? What about when the waves encompass you? How do we respond in those moments? Maybe not much different than the apostles on this occasion. In fact, first of all, I'd like to address this concept of crossing over. In Mark chapter 4 and verse 35, on the same day when evening had come, He said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side." It is oftentimes in the crossing over that danger exists. We have troubles when we are children. We have troubles when we are adults. We have trouble with our health. We have troubles in our marriage, losing a job, troubles with money, troubles with addiction, vices, sins, depression, heartache, emotional pains, and the list goes on and on. On the other side, there may be tranquility, but it's getting to the other side in which we have many troubles. I'd like for you to compare the difference between Matthew's account and Mark's account. In Matthew chapter 8 and verse 26, in Matthew chapter 8 and verse 26, the beginning, "But He said to them, 'Why are you fearful, O you of little faith?'" Well, that implies that they have faith. It may be little, but at least they've got some. But in Mark's account here, Mark chapter 4 and verse 40, "But He said to them, 'Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?'" He says they have no faith. Are there times when our little faith really constitutes, it equals no faith? Because we're giving into the fears of the trouble. We're giving into the fears of the unknown. We're giving into the fears of our world being shaken. That our world is in turbulence. While in the middle of the storm, it is easy for us to think that God is not there. Or that He doesn't even care that we're going through this trouble, that we are perishing. This may be our first encounter of this kind of trouble, but it will never be the Lord's first time. Remember that Jesus was in this storm with the apostles. Now He's in the stern of the ship and He's asleep on a pillow. He's worked very hard all day in teaching, in disputing, and He is exhausted, it would seem. So exhausted that as this ship is being tossed to and fro, He can sleep like a baby. And what we mean by that term is that they have no cares and no worries. So why is it when in our adult time of life that we allow the troubles of this world to disturb us, to rattle us, when we know that the Lord is right there? Why is our faith tested in such circumstances and possibly we fail? Many have doubted that God, in times of storm, is not there. Great men, Job, reaches that point of why is this happening to me? And questions God. It almost crosses the line. What about Gideon? If you're really with us, then why is this happening to us? Why are the Midianites doing what they're doing? We've heard the stories of old and how they crossed the Red Sea and there was a God that was helping our forefathers. But where is he now? He's absent. He's gone. Was he? No. He was still there. And he used Gideon to get them back on track. And now the apostles find themselves in the same type of predicament. Men of the sea, fishermen, yet petrified by this storm that pops up and shakes them. They're in a storm. When they awakened Jesus. They were in a storm. When Peter tells Jesus, command me to come out to you. And Jesus says, come. And he steps out of the boat onto the raging sea. In the storm of the sea. And he shows such great faith in Jesus. And in the process of walking on water, he's accused of having little faith because he starts sinking. So while we are very strong before the storm comes, and we may even be strong at the beginning of the storm, maybe it's over the length of the storm in which you are going that the Lord truly tests you. Will you trust Him? Will your faith increase or will it decrease? It's only after Jesus intercedes that there'll be the calm. And at least Peter had enough wherewithal to reach out to Jesus. And Jesus reached out to him, but still rebuked him. There are 3 parallels that I'd like to make in regard to this wonderful event on one hand and terrifying on the other. This experience that the apostles went through. The first is, could this be the work of Satan? The scriptures do not tell us that, but I want to make some connections here that may enlighten you a little. In Mark chapter 1 and verse 25, now I'm going to read exactly how it would read in the Greek. And so when that happens, sometimes the words are kind of flipped and so on, and it's not going to be in any particular translation read in this exact manner. And so we read, and Jesus, him, saying, and come out of him. And that's the end of the sentence there in Mark chapter 1 and verse 25. So Jesus rebukes this evil spirit. And I skipped over a couple of words. What I needed to do when I printed out my outline is to do it in color. And I don't normally pay attention to color. It's color on my computer. And so I did skip over some words that are actually just gray, right? Because should be in red. Let me read that again. And Jesus rebuked him, saying, hold thy peace, and come out of him. This word rebuke and hold thy peace are also found here in our context in Mark chapter 4 and verse 39. So let's make that connection. So again, Mark 1:25, rebuke, hold thy peace, is being spoken to an evil spirit. In Mark chapter 4 and verse 39, and he arose, rebuked, there's one of our key words, the wind, and said unto the sea, peace, that is, then be still. And so that word be still is the hold thy peace found in Mark chapter 1:25. And the wind ceased and there was a great calm. Now maybe I'm making too big a deal about this, but the point is that Jesus said the same exact words to cast out an evil spirit as he did to calm the sea. There's also something going on here. And that is that Jesus and his apostles are all together in a ship alone. And we have the Prince of the Air who has the capability of doing anything that he wants, limited by whatever God will allow. We also, taking into consideration that you have 4, if not more, there's possibly 6 apostles that were very acquainted. 4, absolutely. Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And these men are on the sea pretty much daily. Now, maybe not at this time because they're following Jesus, but up until this time. We're talking about being raised as fishermen. And they think they're going to die. So consider that this is an opportunity for the devil to overcome Jesus and his apostles. It is also an opportunity for man to see his vulnerabilities in life in general, but especially in the trials of tribulation. How much does it take? How much bad news? Losing your job, some tragic thing happening in your life. Something devastating. For you think, well, this is it. The concept of the moon turning to blood. Moment. Only in God should we put our trust and our faith. And the devil's going to test that every opportunity he can. Now, if he did it over and over and over and over and over, you might say that we get accustomed to it. And it's just, well, that's life. But see, if he can give you some time in which everything's going good and then hit you, it might just be a little bit more impactful. I do not know. So you push me into a corner, I'm going to say, I don't know for sure. But is this an opportunity in which Satan seizes in order to try to destroy Jesus and those closest to him, his apostles? One of the reasons why I can say that is because he already has tried to do that to someone else. And you think about Job. In Job chapter 1 and verse 12, and the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. And then we see in Job chapter 1 verses 13 through 22, there's an assault after an assault after an assault. And I wanted to go through that, but just, it would be an hour and a half sermon. You think about what happens to Job's children. They didn't die of a heart attack. How did they die? What we would conclude is a tornado came through, knocked the house down, and killed them. How far-fetched is that from a storm being stirred up? as we have on this occasion. And of course, Peter saying in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks around as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And what was Satan doing on the face of the earth? In fact, God asks him in Job's account, what you doing? That's paraphrasing. He doesn't say what you doing. And where have you been? Walking to and fro on the earth. He's looking for opportunities. How about Jonah? Now there's a direct connection, but this isn't from Satan. This is from God himself. I find quite interesting. The storm rages because of Jonah. In Jonah chapter 1 verses 6 through 11, fear of the storm turned to the fear of the Lord. In Jonah chapter 1 verses 15 and 16, notice, so they took up Jonah and cast him forth into the sea. They're scared to death. They're throwing cargo overboard. Pray to your God. Let's find out who this guy is and that he is a servant of the Most High God, the Creator. What are we going to do? They row harder. They're not making any progress. And Jonah says, you're going to have to cast me overboard. And so then the men feared the Lord exceedingly. Why? Because the sea ceased from her raging and offered a sacrifice unto the Lord and made vows. Very similar. You have the apostles waking up Jesus from his deep baby sleep, saying, don't you care? We're perishing. We're going to die. And I don't know which is the greater fear. That or when Jesus calms the sea. When the raging waters are, however, 2 feet to a mirrored lake, which scared them the most. We're certainly not going to look at all these verses. But Jesus has shown his power before. He has shown his power over the human body by healing the sick and paralyzed. Power over the spiritual world by casting out evil spirits. Power over death by raising the dead. Power over sins by forgiving the sins of the paralytic who was let down through the roof. But he had not shown his power over nature. He's come close, you might say. Nothing in comparison to this when he turned the water into wine and in the catching of the fish. Remember, cast your nets on the other side. This was awesome. This is something that scared the apostles to death. And I would venture to say that the power of Jesus scared them more than the power that raged all around them before he said, peace, be still. This was certainly different, absolutely shocking to the apostles. Often the storms of life come upon us suddenly, without any warning, and catch us off guard and unprepared. It is in the moment that we are in fear that it overcomes us rather than us overcoming it by faith in Jesus Christ. Miracles already witnessed by the apostles that we know of. Jesus turning water into wine. He heals the official's son. He drives out evil spirits, heals Peter's mother-in-law from a fever. He heals many sick and oppressed. The miracle of the catching of the fish. He cleanses a man of leprosy. He heals the centurion's paralyzed servant. He heals the paralytic. He heals the man with the withered hand. This has all happened. They've been witness to this. They've even seen Jesus raise the widow's son. but this is different. The others, maybe they just felt better all of a sudden, or maybe it was just kind of a sleight of hand. Maybe they didn't know that individual and so on. But how can you control the weather? How in a raging storm can you say, peace be still? And it just calms. I wonder, as a little side note, if Jesus was just a little bit perturbed that he's awakened from his sleep over some simple thing. That these apostles are worried about nothing. What's going through Jesus' mind is unknown, but is it possible that he's thinking, as long as you're with me, everything's gonna be okay, no matter how turbulent the waters may be. No matter how troubled your life seems. Because in Psalm 89 and verse 9, you rule the raging of the sea when its waves rise. You still them, had been spoken. Spoken by the psalmist also in Psalm 93 verses 3 and 4. The floods have lifted up. O Lord, the floods have lifted up their voice. The floods lift up their waves. The Lord on high is mightier than the noise of many waters, than the mighty waves of the sea. You and I serve a greater God than this world could ever try to control. In fact, He's the Creator, and it's all under His control. And even Satan, as mighty as he is, cannot rise up and defeat our God. In Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Sometimes you just can't even explain the tranquility that we can have when our world has been turned upside down and we're being hit from either side. Don't lose faith. Don't have little faith. May it be increased because we put our faith and our trust in the Lord. And He will see us through. If we can help you in that walk, won't you come as we